Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today with us. Thank you all being in your places. Today it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Jørgen Berntsen, that is going to talk about iDAScore. So Jørgen, whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. As mentioned, I'm Jørgen Berntsen. I'm head of the data science team in Vitrolife, where I lead the development of iDAScore and 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁 and other embryo selection models. So what I'll talk today about, that's mainly on iDAScore. And I'll shortly go through how the model was developed and the data set that we use to ensure that we have a robust and very good model. Then I'll talk briefly about how you should evaluate your model, which concepts are important when you're talking about AI and using that in your own clinics and validate that the model is working. And finally, I'll touch about how we increase the trust in AI and how we explain what's going on, and can we really explain? There's a lot of things going on about explainability, but is that really possible, and how do we approach that? So what is iDAScore? Basically, iDAScore is a big neural network, a very complex, large neural network. And what it does is that they take image sequences from the embryoscope as input, as the only input. So there's no input of patient factors or patient demographics, etc. It's only based on images. And then it looks on the whole image sequence and it finds temporal or spatial features in this video. And based on these temporal and spatial features, it then outputs a score that correlates with the likelihood of implantation. So it's meant to be telling you how good the implantation, how good are your embryos, only based on the images. And if you're more interested in how this model was trained, then we have made a recent publication in +1 where you can find all the details about training and structure of the network. Going back to the data, then we use 18 clinics worldwide, so it's a very large data set covering a lot of different clinical practices, stimulation protocols, lab procedures, etc. And in total, we have 115,000 embryos, so we have a lot of embryos to train on. And out of these embryos, there's 15,000 embryos that was transferred embryos, where we know the outcome of these. That is, if it was a positive fetal heartbeat or if it was a negative fetal heartbeat. And as I said, we cover a lot of different clinical practices due to that we cover nearly worldwide data. Then, when we have a model and you want to use it in your own clinic, or you should evaluate how the model is working, then it's very important that you know what's going on and how you should evaluate your model. And here there's two basic concepts that's very important. There's what we call model discrimination and model calibration. And model discrimination, that relates to how your model's abilities in ranking embryos. So the ability to differentiate between a positive fetal heartbeat and a negative fetal heartbeat. That's basically what model discrimination is. And that is usually evaluated by using what we call a ROC curve. And a ROC curve is like the one that is shown on the graph. And here you evaluate the area under the curve so that you get what we call the AUC values of. And that number indicates how good the ranking is. But what is extremely important here now that because I guess many of you have seen a lot of AUCs and people trying to compare cross data sets, but that's not really possible to do. It's because the AUC is so dependent on patient demographics, stimulation protocols, selection procedure, etc. So it's not valid to compare models between or AUCs between different data sets. The only possibility you have is to take the same data set and then evaluate several models on this data set. And this is exactly what we have done on the the data set that we used for developing the model. And here we found that the AUC for iDAScore was 0.67, and then we, on the same identical data set, evaluated how 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁 model was performing. And as you might know, 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁 is a model that is depending on the embryologist doing annotations of several morphokinetics events and also scoring the blastocyst. And what we found was that iDAScore was slightly better than doing the manual annotation. So basically that tells you that the AI is performing at least as good as an embryologist, but without the need to do the manual annotations that is required for 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁. So that's one of the concepts that is very important, that is model discrimination. The next thing that you have to be aware of is what we call model calibration. And model calibration, that is where you take your embryos, then you group them according to the score that was acquired, and then within these different groups, then you calculate the observed rate of ongoing pregnancy, an example. So that is the two concepts that's very important when you are dealing with evaluation of how your model is performing. And I'd like to refer you to a publication that we get recently with what we find as the state-of-the-art way of evaluating how embryo selection works, and that was published in the Journal of Assisted Reproduction and Genetics. So turning now to people that have used iDAScore in clinics. So this is a very excellent study by Ueno and co-authors from Japan. And what they have here is that they have 3,000 transferred embryos, single embryo transfers, and then they took these 3,000 embryos and grouped them according to different ages. So they got 5 different age groups. And within this age group, they calculated the iDAScore, and as I said before, then it's very valuable, or the right way to do it is then to use several other models on the same data set. So they use 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁 model and they use 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁. And what they found was, just as I've shown you, that the iDAScore is performing better than both the 𝗃𝗃𝗹𝗁𝗁, as we show, but also in this case better than iDAScore. And that is valid for all the different age groups. So we see a very consistent and a very promising results that you are performing at least as good as the embryologist. And this is then an example from the same article on what we call model calibration. This is where you group your embryos according to the scores and see how the actual rate of ongoing pregnancies is. And as shown here, you get a very strong correlation between the scores and the actual rate, and that is true for all the 5 different age groups. So again, this shows that we have a model that is very good at performing and predicting the likelihood of implantation. That's a very strong correlation. Of course, the level of the implantation rate go down with age groups, so it's not like it predict the actual implantation, but that's also why we have chosen to use a scale from 1 to 9.9. That is exactly, we don't want to predict the actual implantation, we want to rank the embryos, but also see that you have a good correlation with implantation likelihood. If we then turn to AI explainability, then I guess you all heard a lot of things that's going on with explainability. Everybody wants explainability, and that is of course a very, what you could say, that of course everybody wants that, but is it really possible? There's a lot of studies that has been shown or that has investigated this, but I haven't seen any real evidence that you could have real explainability for every single score. That is, in my opinion, it's extremely, at least very difficult. So what I see today is that the only way that we really can dig into how a model is performing, that is looking on the overall performance of the model. So what we have done is that we have taken or investigated how iDAScore correlates with things that we know already in our daily procedures is important for implantation. So first we looked on the 𝗶𝗶𝗁𝗁𝗃 morphology or Gardner score and see how that correlates with iDAScore. And here we see that iDAScore is decreasing with Gardner score, so it gets the highest grade for ICM score as A, and the lowest if it's scored as a C. And you see the same both for ICM and C. So this shows us that iDAScore has learned things about morphology. Probably it hasn't learned what Gardner score is about, but at least it has learned to look on the blastocyst, and when it grades it, it's kind of mimicking what we have learned ourselves. We have also learned that many cells in 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁 is important. So probably iDAScore has learned something about the same, and at least you see a very good correlation with the gradings. And if we then turn to the speed of development, we have also made a similar study where we grouped the different blastocysts according to their TB. So on the left you have the very fast embryos, and to the right you have the slow embryos. And also here we see a very nice correlation. If you are fast, then we know that's good, and iDAScore also gives you a high score. So again, this shows us that iDAScore has learned that speed of development is very important. Most probably doesn't know anything about TB, because that's a manual, or that's a human invented feature, but it looks for something like we look when we look at embryos. And finally, we have also looked on the direct cleavages. We all know that direct cleavages isn't very good for implantation likelihood. And here we also see that iDAScore has found something similar. So it has, on the left, there's all embryos, and here we see that embryos without direct cleavages has a significantly higher iDAScore compared to if they are direct cleavage from 2 to 5 or from 1 to 3. And if we narrow that down to only considering the blastocyst, then we have the same pattern. We still have a very high score for embryos without direct cleavages that is significantly higher than embryos that has direct cleavages. So again, the iDAScore has learned something about direct cleavages. It knows that this is not good, so it ranks them lower. So just to sum up, then iDAScore is intended to be a decision support tool. It's still the embryologist that has the filing call. It's not meant to be fully automated without anybody looking at each embryo. It gives you a fast and instant evaluation, and it's very consistent. It isn't biased with regards to different subgroups. It's definitely not depending on any manual annotations as you would have for instance, 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁. It's trained on what we think is the largest data set in the world with 115,000 embryos. And it's using the whole time-lapse sequences because we know that compared to snapshot images, that is definitely beneficial to look on the whole video compared to a single image. And then it's validated, it's used on clinics worldwide, and also there's several abstracts and presentation here at 𝗃𝗹𝗶𝗁𝗁 that's dealing with iDAScore. So thank you for listening, and if you have comments, questions, let me know.